Hello, everyone. Welcome to this event, which we were calling What Makes a Movie Integral, because people have been asking this us for years on and off. And we actually kind of changed it to What Makes a Media Work Integral, because we realized we're talking about television series and movies in this. And it also applies to other kinds of visual media works, although most of this applies to any kind of media work. How can you tell if it's operating at the integral structure? And so we put together this list of Mark's work. And take it away, Mark.
Okay. I'd like to start with a short little perception practice, we call that. This is not quite like meditation, very similar, but um, meditation practices work with states of consciousness. Perception practices work with structures of consciousness. Um, it's if we say consciousness is like the ocean, states of consciousness is the waves, the currents, the tides, the weather patterns, all of those things that are constantly in flux. Our states of consciousness are constantly shifting, happy, sad, all of those are always shifting. The structure is like the boundaries of the ocean, the shores, the bottom, the hard edges of it, the field itself. And those evolve as well, those shift as well, but much slower through time. So we're going to we like to play with that structures. So just want to bring your awareness to what we're going to be talking about today, which is structures of consciousness and specifically the integral structure. But just to get a little taste of what we're talking about, everyone get in a comfortable position. And with perception practices, you can do this with eyes open or closed. Whatever helps you to visualize what I'm talking about. So let's first start with just focusing on our breath. Just observing it for a moment. And now just see if you can bring your awareness to your whole life, your past, all of your past, from your birth up until now, what brought you here, but see if you could feel into the stages of development you've gone through. If you're a parent, you've observed the stages of development of your children and seeing how they have shifted over time, how their awareness and everything like that. If you don't have children, but you've seen children at various ages, you know that we evolve through different stages of development, where each stage is a different structure of our consciousness. The boundaries of the ocean shift as we shift through those structures. And it's easy for us to see them when we're children or in our children. They're very apparent, but what we don't realize is that they continue on throughout adulthood. But they're more subtle and sometimes we stop. But so see if you can just reflect on and see if you could look back at those stages in your own life. So after you were born, that first, just imagine that first experience of just looking at everything and not knowing anything. There's no self or other. There's no separation between you and everything else. there's no really awareness of a me and a you. And then we evolve when we start seeing there's me and then there's others. You know, there's, you know, and this, and we shift, and slowly we start to form a self in relation to others around us. Of course, our family, our loved ones, and expanding out, you know, when we go to school, where, you know, we get peers, we get community. If we're in a faith tradition, you know, all of these things, we start expanding our circle of care and concern. So just feeling into that and feeling where you are now, if you can, like, where is your circle of care and concern? You know, are you, you know, is your circle of care and concern for all of humanity, for your nation, for your faith tradition, for your family, all of the above? Now, see if you could bring right now to feel into all of those, your circle of care and concern for yourself, for your family, for your cultural fields, your different cultural fields that you're nested in, faith traditions, communities, your cities, your country. Now feel into all of humanity. You're a part of all of humanity, and feel into what that circle of care and concern might feel like or feels like. Now, see if you could feel into having a circle of care and concern for all sentient life. When we talk about the integral structure of consciousness, integral theory, all of that is mapping that structure of consciousness that's related to that field of circle of care and concern of all of existence itself. All right, so when you're ready to come back, just come on back, and welcome everyone who joined us. We started with a little perception practice, and now we're going to go into, I'm going to start to present the answer to the question that I've been asked a lot, which was, how do we tell if a movie or a television show or a video game or whatever the media work is integral? And I just wanted to start by saying, when we ask that question, when we say that, when we use that term, we often are thinking about, you know, integral theory or meta-modernism. There's different theorists, you know, who are mapping this stage of development, is what it is. So all of these theories are maps of this naturally evolving structure of consciousness. And so for many years, I have made it my mission to see if I could discern how this structure is played out in media. And I had to start with first seeing how all the structures are embedded in what we create. And I'm not the first one to discern this. A lot of my work was based on what Sri Aurobindo and Jean Gebser started with looking at art and seeing how the evolution of consciousness is embedded in our art, in what we create. I was led to this also by my cinematic mentor, Robert Weiss, who was the editor of Citizen Kane and the director of Sound of Music and West Side Story and many other films. And he observed a co-evolutionary relationship between the language of cinema and the audience's capacity to perceive more and more complex ways of perceiving things. So this work, I'm standing on the shoulders of many who've explored this. And so I've tried to really kind of look at it and say, all right, so how do we discern this? And I've analyzed over 1,000 films and television shows and all that. And so this is the research. And still evolving. I haven't seen every film on the planet, every TV show, I'm probably, there's a lot more to discover. So let's start with the presentation. All right, so what makes a media work integral? We'll start there. And so again, how do we discern if this media work was created by a person or people who were operating at the integral stage of development, the integral structure of consciousness? So basically, we got to unpack what the integral structure of consciousness is, right? And that's what all these theories, integral theory and metamodernism, complex thought, all of those, that's what they're trying to do, is to concretize what are the patterns of this structure. One of the first things that a lot of the theorists and observers realized was that the integral structure of consciousness is the first one to perceive the stages of development before it as kind of a bigger picture, to see the evolutionary arc, so to speak, and to integrate that. So it's called, Gene Gebser called it the integral structure of consciousness, because the major drive that he observed was the drive to integrate as much as possible, to see as big a picture as we can and integrate as much of reality as possible into a big picture. So that's kind of like the essence of it. And part of that is seeing the big picture and in time as it's, as we evolve. So it's an important part of the evolution. We could call it evolutionary media as well, because it's kind of a foundation to see that evolutionary arc. So first slide here. Next slide, I mean. Okay, so the first one is a simple one. Having a film that has an evolutionary storyline, events, or character progressions that is given equal or greater emphasis than just a standard resolution of conflict. A classic story is basically about a conflict that is resolved. So we set up a story, there's a conflict, and we have to resolve it. Well, the integral work will tend to have that in there, but they will have an evolutionary perspective, either in the story, in events in the story, or in the character's process that is evolutionary, and have it equal to or greater than that resolution of a conflict. And that that evolutionary arc will progress through stages of development, what we call is vertical development versus horizontal. So a lot of films have a character that heals something, or has to overcome something to change. So every kind of media work does have the characters evolving in a way, but it's usually horizontal development within a stage. So for example, a classic one is a love story where one of the lovers or both have been hurt. And so they're afraid to love again. And the media work is about how they heal that hurt and learn to love again. And that's important, that's a beautiful story, but it's horizontal. There's no stage development. There's no shift in a different stage of development. It's healing a wound, which is also very important. But vertical development is like shifting from being egocentric to ethnocentric, caring about just myself to caring about others as well. That's a vertical shift. And usually in these works, you'll see a shift of about 3 or more stages. And that's because of the magic 3, which is in media, in art especially, when we see something once, it's unique. When we see it twice, we go, that's a possible pattern, but I'm not sure. When we see it a third time, it's like, that's a pattern. So usually they'll try to put in at least 3 shifts. And often this is unconscious. Remember, these theories are trying to capture a naturally occurring stage of development. So they naturally, if you're at the integral structure, you'll naturally look at the evolutionary arcs of things and see these patterns. And usually these patterns are at least 3, because you only go, okay, here's the pattern. All right, so when we see this in media, a classic example is from Citizen Kane. There's a very simple scene of the main character and his wife. Right after they get married, they have breakfast together. And at first they are really close and loving, looking into each other's eyes. And within a 2 to 3 minute montage sequence, we watch the evolution of their relationship. And the evolution is not a upward evolution, it's a de-evolution. So we're watching how a relationship could de-evolve, could fall apart in these stages. So it's like going back, but still the whole film is about the evolution of this character and how his primal wound from childhood has affected his entire evolutionary arc. And that includes his relationships. So here you've got baked in this evolutionary process. And again, it could be forward or backwards moving or convoluted. And there's a lot of films that do this. Another example, a simpler one that many are familiar with, is the film Groundhog Day, where the main character is stuck in a time loop and he's forced to evolve basically from egocentric all the way to cosmocentric. And we watch him as his circle of care and concern grows further and further, wider and wider, deeper and deeper. So that's a character progression. And it can be in stories and all that other stuff. So that's kind of a foundational thing that's connected to the integral structure of consciousness. Next. Also, in order to see this evolutionary arc in the bigger picture and what the bigger picture is, the integral structure of consciousness, if I'm at the integral structure, I will not just try to look at what is objective in the world. I will try to look at all dimensions of existence. So I will try to concretize more abstract dimensions like time, or the different perspectives like interior states. So what's going on subjectively, and also temporally, and try to concretize that for the viewer. And concretize it like, as I mentioned, Groundhog Day. So we have the clock repeating every morning, and these patterns of him waking up every morning to the same radio broadcast saying, today's Groundhog Day. So that's a concretation. That's the concretion of time right there. So that film is concretizing time for an evolutionary purpose. See, here's the real key is the pluralistic structure of consciousness, which is right before it, as expressed in postmodern art and stuff like that, will use the concretization of time and interiority, but not necessarily for the evolution, for an evolutionary purpose. So that's kind of the key. And actually, Debser, he didn't separate pluralistic from integral because he saw them as part of the same wider, deeper evolutionary shift, because the pluralistic or postmodern stage of development is really, it's the part that we look at the world and start to deconstruct it. We start saying that the earlier structure of the rational stage and objective truth, well, that's not the only truth. There's subjective truth and all. So they start to deconstruct it. But, and then we deconstruct it in order to put the pieces back together. But as it was expressed in art, the postmodern deconstructionists became so much of a big movement that, and in other forms, these two have separated. So we have pluralistic and integral, but they're very close. And the key is the concretion of time and interiority being used for an evolutionary purpose? Like in Groundhog Day. It's an easy, simple example. The other example we have here is from Wild Strawberries, a film by Ingmar Bergman from Sweden, from 1957. It's a classic work in cinema where an old man is reflecting back on his life, memories and dreams. And he's like looking back on his whole evolutionary arc as he is traveling to a present family event. So it's this looking back on a whole life through these memories and dreams. So it's concretizing his interior states, and we see his memories and his dreams, and they're kind of dancing between his everyday current reality and reflecting off each other. And as they do, he's learning these lessons, and it's helping him evolve. So again, so there's an evolutionary purpose going on. Next. Now, it also appears that someone at the integral structure of consciousness will attempt to integrate, will attempt to synthesize and integrate and balance the masculine and feminine. And really looking at that from the idea of agency and communion. And what that is the masculine tends to be about agency, action. And a lot of films that we call guy films are action films, right? And they're very agency driven. The plot is event driven. And a lot of chick flicks, we call them here in the States anyways, are about relationships and communion. Well, there's a fundamental kind of primal thing going on there with the masculine and feminine. Now, this is not male and female, because all of us have masculine and feminine energies inside of us. So here you have this, what you'll see is there's a split often in other films not created at the integral, but what you'll see in an integral work is often stories that synergize these. So instead of it being either event-driven or character-driven, it's both event and character-driven. There's a synthesis. So instead of being action-oriented or experience-oriented, it's simultaneous and intertwined. Not so there's a dance where one feeds off the other. And the masculine tends to be separation focused, you know, like there's this versus that, where, you know, like here's the problem, here's the solution, you know, and the feminine tends to be more about union, you know, bringing things together and not separating them to analyze them, but what's the connections, you know? And connected to this is ranking versus linking. So, you know, the masculine will tend to try to create a hierarchy, and often pathologically that can lead to, you know, to other problems there. The feminine will look at more horizontal connections. And the masculine also, when it gets into the spiritual state, it's about transcendence. When the feminine gets into the spiritual domain, it's more about immanence, being fully and being, you know, in embodied spirituality. So anyways, I want to go back to the slide before. Now, this image is from a film called Source Code. What I love about this image, this single frame from the film, is a great example of the synthesis of agency and communion. And the whole film is like this. Look at, there's this moment of communion between a male and female, the masculine and feminine. And behind them is an explosion that's heading towards them. So we have a moment of communion in a high agency moment. that's a beautiful, that gives you a visual example of that type of synthesis. Now, for more subtle expressions of this, you could look at the work of Ava DuVernay, and she really is doing some wonderful work, really reshaping story structure into this synthesis between agency and communion. You could look at her films, Selma, and especially Wrinkle in Time. Now, Wrinkle in Time, there's a few faults that make the film, unperfect, but we could see these moments where there will be an agency process going on, and just at a peak moment, a communion shift will happen, and everything will stop and reorient, and the agency will actually shift, and vice versa, so that each of them starts to feed each other. So she's really playing with that. Next. Okay, so also we could see this evolutionary process. There's an underlying causality pattern in all films. So in a film that's about evolution or has evolutionary pattern, there tends to be a sense that the driving force is an evolutionary impulse, that something is driving this evolutionary process. In Groundhog Day, I mean, what is behind the clock? What is behind this? Why he's trapped? We feel there's a consciousness behind that, but behind his being stuck in time, because it frees him the second he evolves. The second he completes his evolutionary arc, it frees him. So, and all the way through it, he shifts. As he's shifting, it's all once a story starts to, once the evolutionary process of a story becomes equal to or greater than the resolution of a conflict, we start to sense this other driving force, this evolutionary force. Now, in Kubrick's 2001, you actually have a concretion of the evolutionary impulse in the obelisk. So the obelisk appears at different stages of humanity's evolution and helps to trigger a shift. So it's actually a concretion of the evolutionary impulse, just like in Groundhog Day, the clock can be seen as a concretion of the evolutionary impulse. And again, the evolution in 2001 and in Groundhog Day, both the story and the characters are evolving. So it's often, you'll see in these works, not just a piece of it evolving, but often there'll be multiple evolving streams. Next. Okay, so now there are some integral works that take this even further, and that all of the dimensions and perspectives that have been concretized, they will start to actually share multiple perspectives with us. So they'll create works that have multiple dimensions and perspectives of greater depth and span to actually kind of represent the arc in a very concrete form. So literally trying to concretize the actual multiple dimensions of beingness. And of course, we have films like The Matrix, that have, you have The Matrix, you have the Zion world, you have the machine world. All of those are actually separate realities or dimensions of this reality that they are in. And even it goes beyond that in part of the trilogy, where you see that there have been many Matrix, and the Matrix itself has been evolving. And there's been multiple Matrix realities. There's a scene where Neo is in the control room and sees a wall of monitors with his previous incarnations in the previous Matrix realities. So, but that is a concretion of the integral structure seeing multiple dimensions at once. The film Inception by director Christopher Nolan actually attempts to concretize the different structures of consciousness as levels of a dream. And we will go, and so as we go into the dream world, there's different levels of the dream that go deeper and deeper. And as they go deeper and deeper, they're going back down the evolutionary arc. And in each level, there's a shift in time, in the temporal reality. So 5 minutes at one level becomes 5 hours in another, and so, and the climax of the film is a multi-domain, multi-stage, simultaneous shift that the audience actually is experiencing. So these are works that are attempting to really try to concretize that the big picture, the yearning of the integral structure to see the big picture and all dimensions and perspectives simultaneously. And these films are actually helping to entrain us as the viewer. This is what Bob Weiss was talking about. When he started in the silent era, they had to show everything linearly. If you wanted to show somebody going from their house to another person's house, you have to literally show them walking out their door, heading down the street, walking up to their house, the other house, knocking up, the whole thing. As media evolved and the audience co-evolved, you could cut from one to the other. And even now, and it would go faster and faster, you would get in the 60s and 70s, you got music videos and films that were doing these kind of hyper shifts from different places and different things and bum, 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 And here we have two fairly popular works concretizing multiple realities. And the audience, because they're popular, it's telling us that people are following these. If you showed these films in like the 20s and 30s, nobody would be able to understand it at all. So next. Now, the integral media maker often will then look at, see, each stage of development has its own value for what's true. At the rational stage, it's objective truth. At the pluralistic stage, it's relative truth. Truth is relative to my subjective experience. At the integral stage, truth is qualified by which stage of development it is, because they're trying to see all the stages and their value. So when you're at the integral stage, you see that all the stages of development have value. They're all inside of us because it's not a hierarchy of development, it's a holarchy. It's transcend and include. We all still have all of the stages of development we went through. We all still have our egocentric, our ethnocentric, our sociocentric, we all still have the rational part of us. We all still have the mythic part of us. So, and in different situations, different structures are more appropriate. And so when you're at the integral stage of development or structure of consciousness, you recognize that each stage or each structure has its truth. And for that stage, it has value. A great example from science, actually, is that Newtonian physics is absolutely true for gross material reality. But when we start getting into the atomic and subatomic and quantum levels, those same rules and laws do not apply. There's a different truth at those levels of reality that doesn't make Newtonian physics wrong. It's just saying it only applies at this level. So an integral film often will hold that form of truth. Now, this great example is from Wim Wenders' film Wings of Desire from 1987, a beautiful work. And it kind of reverses the evolutionary process in a way. It shows us, well, it's about, instead of evolution, it's involution. So an angel is observing our world and longs to be in it, to feel, to sense, to feel the human experience. And we're shown the laws and rules of the angelic reality and the laws and rules of the human reality. And there's a dance between them. And as the angel then falls to earth, he has to get used to the new rules, to the new reality, to the new truth. And so as we follow him, we're very aware of these two different realities having two very different truths that are true for their reality. And there are different evolutionary processes in each of these realities. Next. So another thing we start seeing is, there's this thing, Sergei Eisenstein in the 20s and 30s, a Russian film theorist and filmmaker, discovered that when you synchronize the different expressive domains of media with a single intention, and you synchronize them together, all speaking to that intention at the same time, you create a lived experience in the viewer. And that's because each expressive domain has a different sensory input. So image is coming through our eyes, visual. We're getting sound, which is the auditory. And we're getting the text, which is more mental and theoretical, and it's different. He considers it a sensory domain, and he also considers time a sensory domain. And what that is the accumulation of meaning patterns through time. So as I show you this shot to this shot to this shot to this shot, each one I'm building a pattern of meaning. So if I show you an apple, close-up of an apple, and then a close-up of a person licking their lips, I think, oh, that person's hungry. That is a temporal construction. I've basically created meaning through time. And of course, as media has evolved, we've opened up to other sensory communication streams. When we get to video games, we have interactivity. So we have kinesthetic and all that. So, but at the integral structure, we start seeing even more complex use of this type of synchronization. And this is called complex synchronization of the senses, that not only synchronizes intention with the channels of expression, but synchronize it with the 4 levels of story, which we talk about, which is the level of text, which is plot and theme. I mean, it's just plot and character and story. The level of subtext, which is the emotional through lines and streams. The themes, which is the metatextual, and also the archetypes and metaphors, which is the transtextual. So they're also synchronizing those across the channels of expression in sync with the intention. And they also are synchronizing the structures of consciousness and the multiple dimensions and perspectives. So all of that becomes synchronized because, again, integration, right? And so we've got the integral structure will look at stories and try to integrate all dimensions of that. We'll look at the channels of expression and try to integrate that. We look at the stages of development of the structures of consciousness, try to integrate that. And we try to integrate it all together. So let's go back to the other slide. So you get a film like Black Panther, and there are other films that have done complex synchronization of the senses, including the work of Andrei Tarkovsky. Most of his works are playing with this, but you could feel the complexity up front. Okay? What Ryan Coogler has done in Black Panther is done complex synchronization of the senses and hidden it inside of a very simple mythic superhero frame. So you've got when you look at it, you don't see the complexity up front unless you're looking for it. And as you look at it over and over again, it starts opening up. Whereas if you look at a Tarkovsky film, it's like you go, whoa, man, whoa, this is, wow. You know, it's like, whoa, whoa, you know, or you look at, you know, Wild Strawberries, you could feel the complexity, or, you know, Federico Fellini's 8.5, you know, he's also doing complex synchronization, but it's like you can really feel it. This is taking complex synchronization of the senses to a different level by making it so complex that wrapping the complexity in simplicity, which is really quite profound. And next slide, and then we'll open it up.
I was just going to mention too that of all the, we have a list of 8 things here, but this is the only one that doesn't really apply to things like books and novels. Because all the others, you can find integral communication, but this one can't really apply because there is no image or sound or temporal element to play with, only words. And you can obviously manipulate the sense of time in a book or novel. You can speed things up or slow them down, but you don't actually have it physically to work with.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Jonathan. All right. And now number 8. Okay. So as we talked about, the integral structure of consciousness is related to a cosmocentric circle of care and concern, that you kind of hold a circle of care and concern for the whole of existence. And that's cosmos with a K. It's not with a C, which is space, right? What cosmos with a K is, it goes back to the original Greek term, which is all of existence itself. So an integral work will often try to give you a sense of the cosmocentric. And often you'll get this overriding sense of a seeking of seeing an integrated bigger picture. You know, there's, you know, you could feel there's a bigger picture here and all the pieces fit together. And often, you know, it's just beyond our capacity to understand. The classic example is the Twilight Zone series. Its opening is basically, you know, saying, you know, there's something beyond our understanding. There is this thing out there, you know, and every episode is about all of these things that are beyond our current comprehension, but we could feel it. You know, we could feel this force or this presence or this bigger picture that we're not privy to. But it also can be shown as trying to embody that circle of care and concern. So a character, or actually the cinematic experience, can give us a feeling of this all-embracing experience of all of existence. So in the center, you see a clip, a still from Terrence Malick's The Tree of Life, where there's this moment where he's using synchronization of the senses, where you have the visuals of light and the music, the play, and where the story has taken you in this moment. It's just, there's an ethereal sense. And right before this, there's an opening of a door, and you walk out the door into this great expanse. So there's this feeling of, you're in this, there's this wide open, vast beauty that fills all of existence. But you can also feel it, you could get the bigger picture. Besides that feeling, I talked about the bigger picture. Well, here, the top is in Fellini's 8.5. And this is a story about a filmmaker who's trying to get back in touch with the creative source. And it opens with a dream where he's in everyday reality, and he escapes it, and he flies and soars, and he's about to touch the creative source of all existence. And he looks down, and his doctor is holding him down on, there's a rope around his foot, and the doctor is hundreds of feet down on the beach, and he pulls him down, pulls him back into reality. So you have this literal concretization of trying to reach that higher place. And in Mirror, which is the bottom image, this is a beautiful work where it's the entire work kind of feels like you're watching from the cosmocentric witness itself. It puts you in the witness seat. And there's a lot of integral works that will attempt to do that, including Citizen Kane. Throughout Citizen Kane, there's a reporter that is trying to figure out the life of Citizen Kane. And we associate ourselves, and so the film is investigating the evolution of this man. But at the end, the famous ending of Rosebud, and the Rosebud is his, well, I don't know, if no one has seen it, I don't want to ruin it for you. But basically at the end, we get to see the cause of all of the de-evolutionary forces of this man's life being this primal wound. But the detective or the reporter doesn't see it. Only we, the audience. And we float above it, and we see a vast archive. And only we are privy to the full story. And we can almost feel behind us that witness. We're witnessing this life. So these are the examples here. Let's go to the next slide. So right now we have these 8, our basics. Jonathan, if you could put up the breakdown of the patterns of the different stages across, there we go. When I do the testing, I use those 8, but I also break it down for all the structures. So I could discern that, for example, I split it here into text, visual, auditory, and spatial temporal patterns, and how they are expressed for each structure of consciousness. So a simple one is the truth, causality, value patterns column. So like I talked about, at the rational stage, objective truth is kind of the truth value. And the pluralistic, it's relative truth. And the integral is qualified truth. So once you hold these, once we have this map, you can kind of see. If you're watching a Sherlock Holmes movie, it's obviously objective truth driven, the main character, that's his thing. And it's really focused on objective truth, right? If you could go to a film like Woody Allen's Annie Hall, it's all about relative truth, right? So so once you have these and those 8, you could really start to begin to discern what stage of development media work is at. Let's go back real quick and then we'll open it up for questions and a dialogue. Let's go. So now, all that said, just because there's integral patterns in a media work does not mean it's a masterpiece, doesn't mean it's a great or even a good film, because there's other elements into making a great media work. There's aesthetic value, there's skill, craft, all of those things are part of the mix. This just means is that the people, one or more of the people created this work tends to operate around an integral structure of consciousness. And the work has some of those patterns. Next film. I'm sorry, next slide. Yeah. Here we put together a list of 25 of the most influential integral moving image works. These are basically film and TV series that have impacted the evolution of integral media making, and most of these have affected cinema as well. So these are influential works that have somehow helped the medium evolve, especially around the integral structure of consciousness. So we have the very first film we discovered, which is The Seashell and the Clergyman by Germaine Dulac, one of the first avant-garde feminist filmmakers in history. Then we have Citizen Kane, Rashomon from Japan, Wild Strawberries, Twilight Zone, La Jetée. You can look at these all and you can play with them. We have an integral movie and TV list on the Internet Movie Database, and there's a link here. So anyways, I think that's it. Is that it, Jonathan? Did we miss anything? Okay, questions, reflections, challenges, you go for it.
Welcome to those who
How many?
Sorry, go
Yes,
ahead,
Hannah?
Hannah.
Just curious, like how many do you need to full integral?
You were breaking up
Maybe you
there.
can understand. Yeah, I'll
If you switch up the video, I think your sound will be clearer.
Yeah, I did. My reception's real bad here. I'm wondering how many ints you normally need for it considered a integral film.
At this point, I am basically saying if any of these are present, it's on the list. So right now, the evaluation criteria, we haven't broken it down yet to this is more or less integral. We don't have enough data yet to really start to parse, the stages, of that. Now, obviously, a film like Groundhog Day, which is operating mostly at the evolutionary character progression, is not as complex as a work like Inception, But then how do we say that that's more advanced or less advanced? So at this point, I'm not making that assumption. We're working on it in terms of how do we parse it? All we're doing now is saying one of these 8 structures is clearly and strongly there.
In general, there's going to be more than one in most works, I would say.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, Groundhog Day is pretty early and it has one very strong, that character arc. But that is sort of the overriding arc, not just of the character, but even of the whole action of the films about his evolutionary development. So it's pretty clear, even though it's not an avant-garde film or not a particularly complex one.
Yeah. Egbert, yes.
First of all, thank you very much for this really helpful talk. There was a great wish to hear you say the criteria and understand a little bit more what makes a work integral. My question is, how can interactivity, as in games, add to making a work, in this case a game, more integral? And how do you look at VR as an integral medium?
Great question. VR is a high integral medium. It is a perspective taking medium. So we can literally take on any perspective we want in an embodied way. So that's a high integral. So that is basically high integral. It's because the boundary between the perspectival field is being transcended. That makes it a more advanced form. The smartphone is an integral technology, but that's at an early integral technology. It's just the beginning, which is the smartphone integrates multiple functions and forms that were previously separate. We used to have a video camera and the typewriter and the this and appointment book, a notepad, all of those things, a phone and a television, all of those were separate. But it's integrated them into a meaningful whole and helped us to integrate these functions and forms. So that's early stage integral technology. And VR is a late stage integral technology where we're actually taking the capacity of the integral structure to take multiple perspectives, and we're concretizing it in a technology. So that is high integral. And once we get into that's at the edge, we start to get into the transpersonal stage when the line between reality and between virtual world and the real world begins to blur and integrate with that. So mixed reality, AR, is beginning to cross that bridge into the transcendence. AI is beginning to transcend the split between our technologies and who we are. That's entering into the transpersonal. And there was another part of your question?
Yes, it was about interactivity as as a
Yeah.
mode of engaging with story worlds and having experiences.
Yeah. Okay. So interactivity is basically at the cusp between pluralistic and integral. We're calling that integrative. So I can begin to integrate my physical world with the virtual world. You know, I'm beginning, so it's rudimentary. It's near where the smartphone is, but it's not as in-your-face integrative. But that form of kinetically connecting with the work begins to bring us towards integral. We're beginning to integrate between this reality and this other.
Certainly in the tools of synchronization of the senses, you can see how adding smell and adding touch, data gloves are a start to that. But as you get more into it, and there's going to be a point where we won't know whether we're in VR or not.
In a practical sense, though, you can use interactivity for evolutionary purposes a lot, or even healing. So what we did in our, we did a intervention, a multimedia intervention for kids at risk of depression and suicide. And so once we analyzed the stages of development they were going through and the emotional arcs that they're experiencing, we realized, all right, when you're depressed, you don't want to do anything. So you want to start the intervention with very little interactivity and slowly make it more interactive while you're using the other expressive forms. Like, so you can start with less interactivity, with the color palette being desaturated. We want to meet people where they are and bring them to where we want to take them. So we use interactivity in that way as well. So it brings us in more. So, but the level of interactivity we could play with for both vertical and horizontal development. But interactivity could be operating at any structure. So the video game could be very mythic. And the interactivity will bring you more fully engaged into it. It'll help you become more immersed into it. But it doesn't necessarily shift you out of that structure. Like VR can set to be the same thing. If we're in a VR reality, that's a mythic world, we're going to really feel that mythic world. But if the creators then use it for us to take multiple perspectives of an experience in the mythic world, then we're playing with the structures of consciousness. See, so the technology doesn't have to be used for its highest purpose. We could use technologies for a lower purpose, which in human history is really where humanity has messed up most of the time, is when a lower stage of development's gotten its hands on higher stage technologies. Does that answer your question? Okay. Henrik.
Yeah, following up on that, if you would expand on like AR and holographic technology that is coming up as one, and also there's a three-part technology question here. One is the AR and the holographic aspect in relationship to Integral, and also deep fakes technology and the implications of that for story making and the belief in pictures in general. And the third one is AI making so much of the orange AI construct is like a very narrow-minded or shallow understanding of what creativity is. Like if you only have, they have AR technology and computers mimic the surface structure of an artwork, and just because there's a surface structure on the lower right that is equivalent of the original artwork or something, then that makes it art, instead of like they have no comprehension of what interiority is and complexity of meaning making on both individual or collective meaning making. So yeah, I'm wondering about your thoughts on this.
All right, you're opening up a can of worms here. So let's get into it.
We got
What
about
you're
10
talking
minutes.
about, look out. All right, we are at a major inflection point in human history. And what you're talking about is really part of what's going on. We have, humanity is facing a civilization-wide paradigm shift on a scale we've never experienced before in human history. The last one of this, near this scale, was the Industrial Revolution. And that was one stage to the next. Boom. It was from feudal empires to the nation state. It was from the mythic to the rational. And that transition took a long time, and it was not easy. And we're still feeling a lot of weirdness from it. But technology has accelerated exponentially over the years. And now what we're seeing is, and you have to understand that technologies reflect our consciousness and are often ahead of our collective consciousness and help cultures and societies evolve. So what we call in integral theory is tetraevolution. So the individual, the culture, the society, and the physical technologies co-evolve. And you could have it shifting from one to the other or whatever, but usually a small group of people invent things beyond where the culture is at. That spreads, and then the culture starts to catch up. But it's moving so fast that different parts of society and culture and individuals are all over the place. So right now, we have the highest, there is a gap between the highest leading edge of our technologies and the lowest structure of consciousness that has political power. A 3 to 5 stage gap across multiple domains. So our social systems are still at rational. Our political systems are at war between mythic, rational and pluralistic, and our cultural fields are in that same war, while our technologies are pluralistic, integral, and transpersonal all over the place. So when you're talking about, and most of a high percentage of the human population is not using these higher technologies at the structure of consciousness that can use them appropriately. So like back when they set off the first atom bomb, Oppenheimer was famously quoted and like looked at it and said, man, we do not know how to handle this. This is way beyond our capacity. Well, something like deep fake, I don't know if everybody knows what that is, but coming online now, very soon, we will be able to take any human being on the planet and create a video using their image and make it look like anything we want. So we could take Barack Obama and put a handgun in his hand and this and that, or we could take Donald Trump and, you know, have him having sex with, you know, whatever. We could do anything and it'll look real. We do, and that is going to be very disruptive because we're not prepared for it. But here's the trick. We are not prepared for it, but by not us being prepared for it, it's unearthing our shadow material that we have to deal with in order to make the transition. So everything that is happening, this gap, is part of the transition itself. We cannot make, as Einstein said, we cannot make the leap. We cannot solve a problem from the consciousness that created it. We have to go past it. So our problems are now global, but so we can't solve it from a rational, nation-centric or mythic feudal structure. And we also have these way advanced technologies way beyond all of this that are coming online, that they're showing us, by us using them negatively, our shadow material is hitting us in the face. So deep fake is part of the deconstruction of how, I'm going to use the deep fake as an example. As we go through these transitions, a paradigm shift, our old paradigms have to fall apart. In chaos theory, you know, things have to fall apart before a new system emerges. One of those domains that has to fall apart is our attachment to centralized information and truth. And with the deep fake, now even a video of event, we won't be able to believe it. It's either, so what is truth? And that is actually calling us towards a higher way of seeking truth. And what we see emerging from that is collective intelligence. So we have, as events are now happening, you could see thousands of people on Twitter or other social media working together to figure out what actually happened, because we can't trust our sources. of information because everyone is biased. And once we get the deep fake, forget it, right? So what I'm saying is we're in a rough time. It's hardcore stuff, dangerous. I mean, our technologies are at the point where it takes less people to create something that could destroy all of humanity. So this transition is very dangerous, but it's also required of us. So it is what it is. And the key is to work with the shadow while we're seeking a new way for us to get over it. And our technologies is a great mirror. So as AR and AI and deepfake are coming online, they're going to be bringing up all of our incapacity to use them correctly. And they're showing us where we're unable to, they're stretching us.
So that means we need to really work with collective trauma work or collective shadow in order to yield this technology and help those who are not, who are leadership, about integral leadership, those who are not aware of shadow stuff or collective shadow and or anything. We're gonna need to work collectively with shadow to be able to meet this.
Yeah, a lot of people are exploring that. A lot of communities are, and that's what we're doing with our work in our courses. That's why we're exploring collective intelligence-based media making. So this is part of it. We're trying to find the way, this new way of being, and help others to find that way as well.
And our premise is that media is one of the few things that can move the society at scale, that can evolve consciousness at scale. That's why we're
and
trying to help people do that.
And there is historical evidence. There is historical evidence that it can. Star Wars is a perfect example. George Lucas, his intention for writing the script for Star Wars was he felt that Western civilization had destroyed myth and that mythology was required for a healthy development of children. So his goal was to re-energize myth for this new era. And I would say the evidence is in that he did that.
All righty. Well, we are at 1:30. We want to wrap up on a timely manner for this. So thank you everyone for coming by. This will be posted at the Integral Cinema Project YouTube channel.
And if there are those of you who want to stay for a little longer, we'll stay for a little bit longer as well. So if you have any final musings or questions. Vic. You're muted.
Yes. Hi, Mark Allen. Hi,
Okay.
Jonathan. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Mac OS has disgraced me today by not giving me a video on my monitor for my laptop. But anyway, gentlemen and everybody who is on this incredible experience, blessings and gratitude. It's really, really nice. I've been a fan of Mark Allen and Jonathan for a while now. The whole idea of trying to apply an incredible map like integral theory to a domain of cinema is just wonderful. Mark Allen and Jonathan, I personally thank you and appreciate that. It's two domains that are just are deep, deep wells of knowledge. I guess if I, beyond that gratitude, Mark Allen, I know you're trying to get a handle on this, and it's, I think Joseph Campbell would agree, it's one of your hero journeys for you and Jonathan both. The thing that interested me in your 8 points as you formulated them right now is trying to get that definition of integral when you're thinking about something as complex as story, the author of the story, the audience, the media, the technology, the quadrants, if you will, integral dimensions. It's, you know, integral theory, obviously by Wilber's own definition, are quadrants, levels, lines, states, and types. And it's hard to just hit on one and go deep down that without being interrelated to all the other ones. I think you guys are doing a great job of that. I really, really enjoyed this. Particular question, Mark Allen, a film is integral if it possesses at least 3 levels of stages of consciousness. Do you think that it needs a second tier integral awareness, or would 3 stages in first tier, would that be considered integral? In other words, does the film, does the consciousness of the filmmaker, the artist itself, does that have to have some kind of integral awareness? Or I don't know, I'm asking that question to kind of push your formulation.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. First of all, each of those 8, a film could have only one of them and still be considered integral for how I am quantifying it at this time. So it doesn't have to have the 3 stages. It could be a film that has just a cosmocentric field of awareness. But as far as the evolutionary arc, we don't know if it's an evolutionary arc unless there's 3 stages. But yeah, it doesn't have to be all the way to integral. It could still all be first tier, but there's a trick to it. It's that perception has to be an integral perception of those 3 tiers. What that means is these 3 different stages have to be seen as having value, and you get the sense like each one is leading to the other, and they're holonic, but they're not hierarchical. You know, there's a lot of different things there. So you could, an integral story doesn't have to have the character go all the way to integral.
Got it.
Is what he's saying. I believe that's what you're saying, right? So
you know, I can remember back early in the discussions in some of the Wilbur salons when they were talking about integral art and trying to define what integral art is. And is it in the artifice itself? Is it in the author of the art? Is it in the author's, the audience's interpretation of that? And
yes.
I don't have any good answers for you, Mark Allen. I'll just, I'm trying to express just how complex this, what you've bitten off. I think you're You're an early pioneer in this, both you and Jonathan. Just keep doing what you're doing. It's much
Thanks, man.
appreciated.
And just for everybody, what the big question is, early on, there was a kind of a split in the integral art community. Is something an integral piece of art because we could see integral patterns in it? Or is just the artist is that integral and anything they create is integral? The problem with that dichotomy, though,
Yep.
is that how do you know that that artist is integral?
Yes.
There's no way to know it.
Yes.
So early on, I decided I'm not going to even talk about this question because it's moot. Because my question is, can I tell if this piece of art is integral?
Got it. And of
That's
course,
all. Just-
like the analogy of in comparative religion looking at so-called sacred scripture, one of the pillars is that incredible sacred scripture can be interpreted at many, many different levels of interpretation, from the most, let's say, primitive to the most exalted. And I would say that's probably also, you'll have people looking at Black Panther and seeing it definitely just from red levels of action, and yet you see, somebody that maybe some of us on this are going, oh my gosh, what a masterpiece.
Yeah.
So I'm with you guys. I really, really appreciate this. It's really nice to share this with people all around the globe. So kudos, I'm a fanboy.
Love you, man.
I was going to say, we're both somewhat influenced by Sufi stories and we both took the same class on Sufism. And there's this idea that you have these stories that have a lot of code sort of embedded in them. And as you come back to them, as you move up your evolutionary journey, you come back to these Sufi stories and you get a new lesson out of it because you're now more advanced. So the story, you can interpret it at higher levels. And a lot of these works, like Black Panther is a great example of a work that's brilliantly complex and also works beautifully at the superficial level of a Marvel superhero story. So you could only see that level, or you could come back to it and see another level, or every time you come back to it, hopefully you see more levels of what it's doing as you get older and as you evolve.
Always the cautionary tale to the Sufis. You may be crucified.
But that goes for all the mystery schools.
Yes.
All the ancient mystery schools and their traditions, the ageless wisdom that is embedded in that, and how it was taught from the beginning. What you can see, what was transcribed from the ancient Egyptians to the Greeks to Plato and so on.
Yeah, and that idea of repeating the story over and over again with the different meanings as we're in a different place in our lives is also in the shamanic traditions as well. The storytelling around the fire. There's often there's certain stories that are repeated over and over again, and each time, there's a different teaching for it. There's a different, experience of it.
So we haven't heard from Carolyn or Nare or Dalmo or Lynn. Any of you guys have anything? Or?
If anyone wants to talk.
Yes.
I was so pleased to see your graph with everything explained, with all the lines. Could have done with that at the beginning of the course. That's good. No, it's good. It's good what you've done. Really appreciate it.
That's it.
All right.
We're good. Okay.
If we don't have
Well,
any
thank
other
you all.
questions, we can wrap this up.
Thank you very much. Really nice to see you both again, and everybody else.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And everyone, Stay safe,
Bye.
stay well, stay awake.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Awesome, as always. Great